On this episode of the show, I have with me Zach Lloyd, founder and CEO of Warp. We're going to be talking about the future of development. We're going to talk about a lot of these new initiatives we're seeing come out around developer tools, and a lot of these things are coming down top down, whereas before it used to be developer driven. So we're going to talk about what the ramifications to those decisions are, developer experience, what is shifting in the day-to-day of a software engineer. We'll talk about where Warp fits into this, and just the market's moving quickly. So we'll love to get Zach's views on all that. Zach, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we start, can you tell everyone what Warp does?
Yeah, so Warp is an agentic development environment. It has grown out of being a kind of reimagination of the terminal. So when you open up Warp, it will look very much like a command line interface. But basically, it's a product now where, as a developer, you kind of tell the computer what you want to do, be it a coding task, a production task, something with Git, something with Docker. It can really be anything because it's at the level of the command line. And when you tell the computer to do something, it launches an agent, and possibly multiple agents work at once. And it's built for what I think is the new development workflow, where you're doing less and less development by hand, where you're handwriting code or handwriting terminal commands. You're doing more and more development by prompt. And so it's meant to sort of be first-class support for that new workflow.
Awesome. And this topic, I know, is being discussed quite a bit. I don't know if we're getting the right lens sometimes, because I feel like things are moving quick. And I was going to ask this at the end, so I'm going to move it up because I am kind of curious. Things are moving quickly in this market. I mean, I think a year and a half ago, I'm trying to recall if during my interviews, any engineering leaders are really dialed in on tools that were going to impact from an AI generating code perspective. I think it was kind of like, well, it's interesting, we're seeing it, we're reading about it, but I hadn't really heard about someone diving into it. In the last 6 months now, I've not spoken to an engineering leader that is not introducing some form of a tool as a POC in development somewhere, someplace. I mean, the market's rapid just shift, the rapid pace of change. Are you seeing that? I mean, your tool fits into the ecosystem, so yeah. I'm hoping you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a totally different world. So to paint the picture a little bit, I would say maybe a year ago, it was just being like the developer tools market, not a great market. Like most developer tools, free, viewed as developers' choice. Developer kind of knows best what's going to make them most productive. They're going to customize it. And that has changed dramatically along a whole bunch of dimensions. So for one thing, I actually wouldn't even call it the developer tools market anymore. It's really the market for the production of software. So it's like, what's the software that you can deploy at your company that's going to help your company ship software more quickly? What's the software that's going to write a big portion of the code that you're shipping? And it is still, imagine this is like developers are going to be using these tools, but it's like calling it the developer tools market is a little bit, is just like, it's a different market kind of. The software does something fundamentally different. These tools are all paid now, and it's recognized that there's this big, marginal cost if you want to use them, because they're all powered by LLMs, which are expensive. And so that's also really changed the market. And then the third thing is, there's like top down pressure, probably, I think, starting all the way at the top of the company, to be like, how does our company stay competitive in producing software? How are we, if we're not empowering our developers with the right tools and products that help them ship software more quickly, we're going to fall behind. And so there's a real push to deploy these new types of products, and that's never existed before. So it's like, that manifests as like a CTO or VP of engineering, a head of like there's a new role that I've seen a bunch, which is like a head of AI developer tooling. And so it's just a totally changed landscape right now. It's changing very quickly.
Absolutely. And you referenced, at some point, this was a developer driven, tool decision, right? And I guess to a certain extent, depending on the size of the company. And I guess when you look at it now, you mentioned being more top down. Are those in conflict with each other? I guess it's happening so fast that sometimes people don't get a chance to adjust.
So what I'm seeing is that companies that will basically, they'll make a bunch of these tools available, and they'll do sort of pilots, proof of concepts. Maybe they'll make them generally available. The thing that I see most often right now is not like everyone must use the same AI developer tool, but that everyone must be doing development with AI developer tools. So you could see a place piloting Warp plus Cursor plus Claude Code, maybe Windsurf, some places Cognition. And so no one knows what like the exact right tool is, and there isn't like a ton of pressure to standardize on one tool. But what folks are sort of stressing about is like making sure that the developers on their team are embracing these tools at all. And there is like pushback amongst developers to like, then we can talk about like why, but there's some resistance to adopting these tools at all. And I think that's the thing that companies seem most concerned about.
I guess as quickly as things have shifted, as quickly as things have moved, the developer, for the most part, engineers like solving problems. They go into software engineering because they enjoy that, the act of solving those problems. Some people actually enjoy coding. I mean, it is a thing. I know a lot of people that do. It is the problem solving. I guess as you're seeing, I mean, you're even seeing these publicly stated by, large tech companies that everyone has to include AI someplace before they can ask for more headcount or more resources. From the developer experience standpoint, if you've gotten into this, you have a 10, 15 year career and all you've known is writing code. That's been your core job.
Yep.
How does that individual developer change? Are they, and I guess maybe the couple of options is, are they like, this is fantastic, I can stop coding. You know what? I never said it. I don't have to be here just tapping on the keyboards. Are they like, hey, you're taking away my job? Or B, what else do you want me to do if I'm not going to sit here? I mean, are we seeing some of those, all of those, any of those?
Yeah. So to be clear, like I'm my background is as an engineer. I was a principal engineer at Google. And I still do engineering even at Warp. So I'm using these like new generation of tools constantly, and I still write code at Warp. So I can kind of speak a little bit firsthand, and then I can speak a bit to the experience of developers who work at Warp trying to adopt these tools. So I guess a couple thoughts. So one is that I think coding, literally typing code, is not the essence of the software engineering role, and kind of never has been in some sense. Like the essence of being a great software engineer, in my opinion, is problem solving. It's understanding specifically what problem for a user you're trying to solve or for a customer, and being able to build a piece of software that effectively solves that for them. And that doesn't change at all if in a world where you're asking an agent to do work for you. The second thing is that I would encourage engineers to think of using agents as just like using another tool. There's like skill to it, and it can actually be really fun if you kind of build the intuition on how to prompt them, how they use context, how to provide the right context. And then finally, like I would suggest very strongly, and we have these guidelines at Warp where it's like, you don't just tell them what outcome you want, you tell them right now how to do it. And like, that's the essence of engineering to me, is like, okay, I want to build something. I want it to be composed in a certain way. I think the API should be this. I think the data model should be that. And like where engineers have a lot of frustration using these tools, I think is when the problem that is underspecified for them, and you just specify an outcome. You don't specify like a method. And you have, a bunch of senior engineers who will be like, okay, I want you to build this thing for me. And then it goes and it, spins its wheels for a really long time, and it produces something which is not up to the coding standards of the team. And then you're just like, this is a waste of my time. I think that's the experience that a lot of like professional developers have had with these tools. And, to some extent that's because the maybe the models when they first used these tools weren't as good as they are now, but it's also because like they weren't approaching it in the same way that they would approach like learning how to like master their terminal setup or master their IDE setup. It's like a sort of new discipline of engineering would be my thesis. And so you can get there. And that's how I would present it to engineers who have either had bad experiences or might have like some trepidation around like, is this going to take away my job? I really don't think, at least not where it is right now. That's not at all what we're looking at. We're looking at like a new class of power tool for developers. Now, in like a few years down the road, I don't know. This stuff's changing so quickly, but that's not today's state.
I love that take. And you mentioned a new class of power tools. And if we were to look, and I don't have the history, so I'm just going to mention, I'm sure somebody out there knows better than I do. But if we looked at the history of development and we were to go back when development 50 years ago was a different way of writing code versus even 20 years ago versus today, there's always been, to me, a new class of power tools being delivered, right? I mean, I think that's just been a consistent thing. Technology is hard. It's done very manually hard until a tool comes in. It simplifies it until there's another shift and there's an absence of any power tools until power tools get developed. And then we kind of see this, the cyclical nature of it. I would probably assume if we took developers in any of those other blips in the last, 40, 30, 20 years, we would probably have similar discussions if we were to abstract away where the work's being done. And engineers haven't been eliminated. There's maybe still too much work. There's still a lack of engineers. And I guess from your perspective, when you do see these class of power tools, even if they do get better, where it's starting to take away some of the code, have you run into an org, a team where it's like, you know what? Backlog's empty. We've just so good at crushing it. We've got nothing left to deliver. We actually might get fired. I actually think, when has that ever happened that even if we were to speed up and 10x every developer?
No, that's not a thing. Like there's basically an infinite demand for software in the world. And this is, again, when I talk to engineering leaders at big enterprises, they're not viewing this as like a zero sum type thing. Well, if I have more AI, I have fewer engineers. They're viewing it as like, I have some fixed number of engineers. I have this basically infinite backlog of software products that I want to build, software infrastructure that I need to build. And these tools are like a multiplier effect on my existing engineering team. And so they're like, okay, this is amazing. This might get me, say it's even just a 20% improvement. And you have 1,000 engineers on your team. That's like 200 extra engineers of capacity to build stuff. And they're psyched about that. I haven't, again, maybe they would never say this to me, but they haven't been like, this is great. I can eliminate 200 engineering headcount. It is, sort of two sides of the same coin. But I think you made the key point, which is like, software is huge leverage for these companies. Like every company at this point is in some sense a software company. It's the old software's eating the world thing, but it's true. It's like, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Probably the biggest growth lever you have, or one of them, is like, how effective is your company at building software, whether it's for internal use or for, end user, like consumer use, you're selling software. And so this is just like a huge multiplier to that. So I firmly agree with what you were saying there.
Yeah. And I think if we were to look at, you said something, I think, very instrumental, that software engineers get into it not because of the code writing. It's the problem solving. It's the old, can you break down a problem into smaller, manageable pieces of work. And I think most engineers tend to be systematic in the way they think.
Yeah.
I think when we look at backlogs and we look at there's tons of comics of requirements being, spoken about to what's being delivered. We've always seen those comic strips, and it's never the same. Is this an opportunity for developers? And I'm calling it the shift left. No one else is. This is just my own little thing. But I mean, shifting left into the business. I don't know what else to call it. To actually get closer to the problem, to actually sit side by side and become more functional because they have more time. They can actually address some of those things up front because they are seeing this maybe at a different lens than they've had the time. And I actually think of some of those requirements issues time. If you have X amount of time to understand a problem versus I have a lot more time, I feel like you might understand the nuances of requirements differently. Is there a world in which if we do have more time, we will see more efficient bridging of those requirements to what's being delivered?
Yeah, I think the way this shakes out in an ideal world is that developers just are doing higher leverage work, and the drudgery, the grunt work, the typing, it kind of goes away. And I think that where is that sort of more interesting strategic work? I think it's in getting closer to the user. I think it's in thinking harder about the problems that AI can't solve, which might be the systems architecture or more product oriented problems. And so, or business oriented problems. So I do think it's going to change a little bit of not even a little bit. I think it's going to significantly change what an engineer's day to day is. I think in a cool way. But it's you alluded to this before. I think these levels up in abstraction of the software development job have always met with some resistance. Even, I wasn't alive for this, but there's always these memes about, you're not a real developer if you're not coding in assembler or then in C, or then you're not working you're working in TypeScript. That's no longer real, or Python. It's and so there's always been some resistance to that, but I think it opens the door, like you said, for developers to do work that's more closely integrated with the business, with the product, closer to the user. And that will attract a different type of person maybe to engineering. But that's what we hire for at Warp, by the way, always has been someone who is more focused on the problem than the code. And it's not to say the code isn't important. The code will still be important, but what really has mattered is how much do you care about solving the user problem?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think everything you said, I think is a fair view of, and I do think a different type of person coming into the field could be, it could be the way. I actually shifted more to data versus software engineering because I actually didn't enjoy the coding. I just didn't like it. And that for me was another way of I enjoyed the data, the manipulation of it, all those things. And, a tool like this may have been okay, that takes away some of the time behind the keyboard. I might have decided that would have been a different route. That's all good. I enjoyed data as well. When you look at this ecosystem and you mentioned some tools, I also think it'd be great for the audience. I know you kind of talked about Warp, but in terms of the ecosystem, if somebody hasn't used Warp, if we could actually maybe give them where that workflow looks like, where it slipstreams in and kind of that relationship, I think it'd be good.
Yeah, for sure. So the quick history of Warp, and I think it's useful to give a little bit of history, is that we started as a kind of reimagination of the terminal. So the terminal and the IDE are probably the two main tools that developers have lived in for the last, 30 whatever years. The terminal even longer. Terminal predates the IDE. And so we built this, what I think of a really, really nice user experience for users to tell their computer what to do with commands. And so that would be Unix commands, think of it, or PowerShell commands. What Warp is now is a kind of expansion or evolution of that, where rather than telling your computer what to do in machine language, you tell your computer what to do in natural language. And it uses a very similar interface to just a regular command line, except the big difference is that the input is English, and or it can still be terminal if you want to like go down a level, because I do think it's important to have that capability. But the primary interface is that you are submitting a prompt. And so like as a typical developer, the way that I might use Warp is I might come into work and be like, okay, today I know that I want to like fix this thing in the UI. I want to like, we've been having some crashes on the server. I want to debug those. I want to maybe like do some work where I'm making sure the telemetry in our app is feeding correctly into one of our production systems. And so I will come in and I will do a prompt for each of those. And by prompt, I mean like, you know, I'm kind of like interacting, going back and forth with the LLM to specify not just the problem, but also like the shape of the solution. So I, like I was saying earlier, like, hey, here's the files I think you should look in. Here's some images you should look at to fix this UI bug. Here's where I think you might want to architect it. You know, here's our coding conventions. Please go ahead and start doing this task for me. And then I'll shift my attention over to the production task and do something very similar and be like, hey, you know, this is the schema for our telemetry. This is like where in the code I think maybe we're not firing it or we're missing coverage. Could you investigate, report back to me what the coverage is, and then we'll come up with a plan for making a change. And because these are like, you know, pretty meaty tasks, what's happening is like in Warp, you can run multiple of them at a time. Otherwise, you're just like sitting there looking at an agent doing something, which is that's boring. You don't want to do that. And so I think actually like the concurrency aspect becomes important. And so you start these things, but they will often not finish on their own. That's just the state of the art today. And Warp is state of the art on all of the like measured things, whether it's SWE-bench or we're number one on T-bench, which is the terminal AI benchmark. And so even with the quality of the models, like it's very much a human in the loop iterative process. I kind of imagine you're managing like a really smart, but sometimes kind of clueless junior engineer who you've like tasked to do things, and they can get so far before you need to hop in and do it a little bit yourself. And so, you know, Warp is an interface designed for that workflow. And so where it fits in relative to these other tools and where it's distinct is like, there's a lot of AI tools that are based out of the IDE. And so this would be like, you know, Copilot or Cursor. And those tools, they're like superpower, at least out of the gate, was great auto completion based on AI. But you know, our thesis is that's still like an assist for a hand, like a code by hand way of working. And I think that's going to become less important. And then the other class of tools that Warp kind of competes with are things like Claude Code or Codex CLI that live in the terminal, but they're actually like CLI apps. And our big differentiator there is like, we are the platform. We're not an app that runs within it. And so you get, kind of a much more user-friendly, powerful UX for doing this agentic development if you do it using Warp. And so that's like where we fit in the landscape.
Very cool. Very cool. Yep. I appreciate that overview. It's good because I think tools are, as we said, a lot of tools, a lot of options. It's good for people
and it's changing so fast. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's such a fun, cool space to be working in. Because like no one has totally figured out how developers ought to be working over the next few years, to be honest. And like, I think our approach is one of the ones that I think like matches the workflow really well. But like, who knows? The stuff is changing so quickly. So fun to try and figure it out.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely want to thank you for your time. I know we hopefully covered a ton of ground. I'm sure some people will have some more questions. Zach, if there is a good way of connecting with you, asking you a follow-up, how would someone do that?
Yeah, so to check out Warp, go to warp.dev. Just want to make sure I mention that. And then for me, I think the best thing is LinkedIn. I'm actually pretty active there. If folks are interested in this topic of like how this market is changing, I'm posting a bunch of content there and there's a bunch of discussion going on. So follow me on LinkedIn.
All right. Zach, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for taking the time.
This was awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think if you could share this episode with others that might find it beneficial, be great. I thought the content was fantastic, talking about the future of development, talking about the impact of these decisions on tools, where Warp fits in if you weren't familiar with it. So it'd be a great one to share with other engineers as well. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.